So last video, we started to space out our cards a little more nicely, giving them a little bit of margin on the left and the right, so that all of our animals are nicely spaced in our container. Now, if we look at the final product, what we're trying to aim for here, I want you to take a look at this container element. The slightly off-white background, the one that holds all of our animal cards. Look where it's placed here, and look where it's placed in our final project, right? We're missing a few things, clearly. This one versus this one. First of all, our header looks much nicer. We got a cool little logo now of a little bear face. That looks good. It's displayed in line with our H1. So our header, our silly animals header, looks nice. It's positioned well. But we need to position this container to overlap the header a little bit. So to give you a quick little high-level overview of how to work that, I'm going to paste into Slack a little code pen from Chris Inman. Another one of the same developers. Let me find it. There it is. It's about CSS positioning, which I have shamelessly copied from him. I'm going to go ahead and paste that into Slack right now. And I want you guys to just take a few minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and read this with each other or read this to yourselves. And then when we're done, we're going to go over exactly what it's saying and how it works. This is going to be talking about CSS positioning, which is one of the more tricky concepts in CSS styling. So I'm going to paste it into Slack in a second. You go ahead and read it. Tell me what you think, all right? Cool. Everybody about done? Any questions from the reading really quickly before I go over it? The content here is pretty on point. It covers all the CSS positioning topics that you really need to know, the fundamentals for styling and positioning any of your HTML elements on your page. So the first thing I think you all notice is when you scroll up and down this page, what do you see? Yeah, check out that green box. What is it doing? It's staying exactly where it is, right? Technically on the page, it's like in the middle right of the page. When you scroll down, it's not going anywhere. It's staying in the middle right of the page no matter what you do. Does anyone know why that is? What CSS position is it given? It says it in this unordered list right here.
Fixed.
Yeah, exactly. It's fixed. Fixed is an interesting concept. I think it's easier to understand than the other two. Absolute position elements and relatively position elements do some interesting stuff. But fixed position, it does exactly what you see here with this green element. It's fixed to exactly where you want on the page. And I actually think one of the best ways to understand how fixed elements do what they do is to look at one of my favorite terrible websites. It's called Ling's Cars. I showed you guys this already, right?
Yeah.
Ling's Cars, it's not the running dogs one. That one's a little more annoying. Ling's Cars, here we go. One of the greatest terrible websites ever made on the internet. Now, if you look at Ling's Cars, there's a lot of things going on here, right?
Yes.
And it makes it, I'm gonna mute this really quickly.
What was
But if you look, on the right side, you have two of these little boxes. See this box right here? And this one right here? Both these on the right. If you scroll down this page, what do you see happening with those boxes?
They don't move. Oh.
They don't move anywhere. They don't go anywhere, do they?
No.
They stay in the same place. This is what a fixed element does. Fixed elements stay in the same place on your page no matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you scroll down, up, move around, make the size of the entire screen smaller. Fixed elements stay in the same place. Now, I'm going to leave this site because there's a chicken on it. And I love chickens, so I'm gonna go ahead and X out of this for now. But this is a good way to think about how fixed elements do what they do. It is a real site, yes. Yeah, like people actually use that. It's a business. He runs his business through Ling's Cars. Everyone uses that. I'm just kidding. So, if we're looking here, if you notice on my updated page, what about my new page is fixed here? Can you tell? Yeah, this part right here, my navigation is fixed. And we're going to talk about fixed in a second. But really quickly, I want to go over the other two because they're important. Absolute and relatively positioned elements. So if you read a little bit, basically any kind of CSS positioning properties allows you to position elements the way you want them to, either behind an element, in front of an element, relatively positioned according to another element's position. You can use these to move them into literally any place on the page you want, which is really, really useful sometimes. But the two that we have to pay attention to, which are a little confusing, are absolutely positioned elements and relatively positioned elements. The only thing you should know is that absolutely positioned elements don't line up according to the normal flow of HTML elements. Basically, when you give something an absolute position, whatever is the parent element, whatever element holds it, that's the position it's going to be positioned according to. And we can change that by using a left, right, bottom, or top CSS properties. Now, this seems a little bit abstract right now, and it's not going to make sense, so don't worry. But when I show you what it looks like, it's going to make a lot more sense to you. Same thing with relatively positioned elements. It's basically positioned relative to its normal position. So wherever it is, normally speaking, you can move it left, right, top, bottom, depending on where exactly it is. Be careful with relatively positioned elements because the size of the screen determines kind of where they are. And that can be a little confusing if people are using mobile phones, iPads, or different size screens for their desktops to view your page. So really quickly, we want this container element to overlap this guy right here, right? To overlap our header. One way to do that is to give it an absolute position. I'm going to show you what I mean. So here, I want this entire container to overlap my header to about right there, right? So I want everyone right now to go into your style.css and find your container element. Right here, container. See this right here? All you need to do to change its position is say position absolute. And watch what happens. What happens immediately? What does it do? Yeah, it positions itself all the way to the left. Now you're like, hey, what the heck? I don't want that, right? That's all kinds of messed up. And in fact, you can get rid of this margin left and margin right auto, and nothing changes, huh? So what I did really quickly is I gave this a position of absolute, and it moves to the left. It ignores its left and right margin because those don't space it out anymore. So when I get rid of those, nothing changes. But what I can do is now I can use these properties like left 50 pixels or top or bottom, top, let's say negative 100 pixels, right? And you can change the way things work, but I'm gonna say top just 100 pixels. Boom, check that out. What just happened? That's a lot closer to what we wanted, huh? So let me give you a quick little overview of what just happened. We gave this a position property and with a value of absolute. What absolute means is it gets rid of the normal flow of the element. It doesn't lay itself out the way it normally would. Instead, it lays itself out according to the parent container it's in, which happens to be our body. So the body tag now holds this little container, and it's positioned absolutely so that we can say left 50 pixels, and it'll move it 50 pixels from the left. We can say top 100 pixels, and it'll move it 100 pixels from the top. So yeah, let's do percent instead. That's a good point, Joe Green. Since it's 80% wide, we can give it a 10% left, and that'll have the perfect margins on the left and the right. And that'll center it perfectly in the middle. See that? And now whatever we do, it stays perfectly in the middle. But notice how when I make it smaller, the 100 pixels changes how close it is to the H1, which isn't really what I want. Instead, we can give it a top of something like 15%. Let's go with 20%. Boom. Check that out. Now, it positions itself almost exactly right below my H1. And that looks pretty nice. We're now overlapping the header with our container div. You see this? This is what absolute positioning can do for you. It allows you to position things according to exactly where you want them to be. And going back to this code pen really quickly, absolutely positioned elements are removed from the normal flow. Every other element on the page acts as if this thing does not exist anymore.
Seriously?
Yeah, so nothing else on the page realizes that this absolutely positioned element is there, which is nice. It makes it easier for us to position things around it because we know exactly where this is and we can style it according to what we want. So this is a cool little trick if you want to put something in the exact place you want it to be, give it an absolute position or a relative position and move it around. Now what if I change this to relative? Now it's changed up a little bit. What relative does is it positions it according to where it used to be. So if I get rid of both of these things right here, position relative means it's relative to its old position. And then I can say left 10%, or something like top 5%, and it'll move it from its relative position, relative to where it used to be, which is right there. Absolute, on the other hand, positions it absolutely according to the parent element, which is the whole body of the page. That's why when I do 10% and top 20%, it moves from the very, very top of the page, not just from right there where it relatively was. Now, the difference between relative and absolute can be confusing if you've never seen this before. So don't worry too much about getting all of this right. Just understand what's happening here when I change the position from absolute, relative, etc., and how we can use left, top, right, and bottom to move them around. All of these are changing the normal position of the element, which is static. Elements are default positioned static. And so when you give something else a property like position fixed, position relative, or position absolute, it's no longer position static, and we can give it a top, right, bottom, or left CSS property to move them around. So that's a lot of stuff really quickly, but check it out. How much closer are we right now to our final product than we were before? If we take a look, this is kind of what our final product looks like, except we have some box shadow here that looks a little nicer, and we have a navigation. So that's really the last thing we need to do, is we need to add a navigation element to our page, and add some box shadow, and we'll be pretty much done. So I'm going to wrap this video up for here. I'm going to post the code into Slack. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll come around and answer your questions.